Hello and welcome to this episode of Shift Happens with myself, Matt Archer Davis. I am the owner, founder, managing director of digital marketing agency, The Bright Click.
And good afternoon from me, Sanjeev Dodia. I work with scale-up businesses on their growth challenges.
Well, thank you very much, Sanjeev, and thanks to everyone joining us today. So what we're going to talk about today is a topic of what actually deserves your attention right now. Now, basically, most leaders, most business owners, leaders, they're not short on time, right, Sanjeev? But generally, they're short on the clarity of what potentially deserves their attention. And I know from personal experience that, it's easy to focus on the wrong things and to get caught up in different elements. I don't know if you want to just sort of start off with a little intro into this and how you perceive the subject.
Yeah, Matt, maybe we'll start with a question. If you looked at your last 2 weeks, where has most of your attention gone? What would your diary tell us about your priorities?
Well, as part of this podcast, we talk about the theory alongside the actual kind of doing. And what I would say is I've been guilty in the last couple of weeks of being a little bit in amongst the weeds. I'm not really focusing on the growth part of the business. There's been some things that have pulled me in. And, I've been completely frank and candid. I can be guilty of losing some bigger picture vision by getting a little bit kind of pulled into things that sort of take up my time. So I think that, if I looked at my calendar across the last 2 weeks or my diary or my activities, I would see reactive stuff rather than leadership stuff, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue, and that's not just you, Matt. That's all of us, right? We kind of get dragged in to where the noise is reactively. So urgent isn't necessarily important, but we can get sucked into it, and then our attention gets focused on that, and where focus goes, energy. So, and I think that's the trap, that's the challenge for so many business owners that we work with.
Absolutely that. And I think that so we can define essentially what we would call maybe 3 different buckets of attention, and it could be clarified in slightly different ways. There's sort of different names for these buckets, but you've got essentially what is called the survival bucket, and you might tell me different terms for this, Sanjeev. The maintenance bucket, and then the kind of strategic bucket. Is that the way that you'd kind of see that as well?
Yeah, I've got similar terms, but maybe the control bucket, about managing cash flow, margins and operational delivery issues, and capacity, which is all about team capacity and systems and delegation, and growth, about the sales engine, marketing effectiveness, partnerships, market positioning, and so on. And what happens, Matt, is the focus goes on the first one. You call it survival. Yeah. I call it control, but it's very operational. It's so much of that focus. I'd say, good old Pareto, 80% of the focus goes into that bucket at the cost of the strategic capacity, building the capacity to really enable growth, and the strategies, marketing, sales, go to market, they're going to drive that growth.
So it's kind of inverted, isn't it? In the sense that, 80% of the focus, you're saying there, generally from leaders, from business owners, are in that control or survival bucket, whereas in fact they should be 80% more in the strategic kind of bucket. The majority of the time, those things are not inverted in the way that they should be. So should we start talking about that survival, that control bucket? Like, you're talking about things like focusing on cash flow, bottlenecks, staff issues. These are necessary, aren't they? They're important, but they shouldn't dominate your attention. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I think of course you've got to prioritize things like cash flow and profitability and operational issues in delivering your promise to your customers. But I think the business owner focus, the leadership focus, should be not on just fixing those problems, putting our Superman pants on and firefighting and solving it. It's actually thinking about what's the root cause of this issue, what's causing this problem to happen. What's the reason for the gap or the dysfunction or the disconnect or the bottleneck we've got, and what's the systemic solution for it? What's the system solution? So usually it's either we don't have a process that works well, we don't have a system that can be followed, the people that are running that process aren't trained enough, or we're not effective in managing the consistency of how it's done. So it's fine to focus on it, but focus on the addressing the root cause, so you're not back again firefighting. Well, I think too much time and effort goes, and that's the problem. If 80% of the effort goes in the firefight rather than strategically looking at that challenge and addressing it in a process-driven way, in a systemized. We had this conversation earlier in the week, right? Around so many businesses that you work with not having that consistent CRM flow.
Yeah.
And then having anxiety over we haven't got enough pipeline, or we haven't got we haven't got the order book, and so on. That's just a symptom of a lack of a structured, systemized process that's consistently applied. So it's fine to focus on the problem, but it's the lens with which you look at it. That's probably what I'd advocate is where attention should go.
Absolutely that. Yeah. So it's like, before, getting involved in operational bottlenecks, for example, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, if you keep going through the same bottlenecks, wading through the same weeds, then your attention is going to be there most of the time, right? So it's understanding why those things exist in the first place and fixing them once and fixing them forever. So again, that all does come down to systems and processes and businesses running on systems, in that purpose, right?
Yeah, because Matt, if you as the owner or you as the directors in the business aren't putting your attention to that, and you're joining everyone else in the reactive and the firefight, then who is going to address that for the long term? And how long is it going to take you to really move it forward? And that's where I think we've got to be pretty ruthless in where we invest our time as business owners, because I think what we need to be doing is investing our time to leverage all of our skills, knowledge, and experience, as you said, in doing something once that enables others in your team, internal or external, to then run that process forever. That's called leverage, right? Now,
exactly.
if 80% of your time went into solving the issues in that way, then you can then evolve to those other areas, like we talked about, capacity and growth and strategies that are really going to move you forward. If you're not progressively doing that, then growing a business and growing the asset value of business is going to take a whole lot longer.
What's a good, one of the issues that I have personally around this is not always being able to recognize when I'm sort of, moving between these attention buckets, if you see what I mean. Like, you can go with the best intentions of being focused in that strategic bucket, if you like. In that strategic bucket, let's clarify, working on your sales pipeline, working on your pricing, maybe your hiring, your recruitment structure and that type of thing. Again, structure, delegation, long-term positioning, clarity of leadership, all of those kind of things. That's where you do move the needle, right? That's where the business does move forward. But it can be very easy to start off in that bucket, but to gradually move your attention back down to the noise of the survival bucket. But so and then recognizing that you're in that survival bucket again is where I actually quite often struggle and rely on your help sometimes to remind me that that's where I am. What are some good techniques that business owners such as myself can use to make sure that you stay in that in the bucket, the strategic bucket?
Yeah, well, Matt, the framework, I coach, and chunking down the goals into manageable cycles, right? And I think 90 days is a really good cycle, because every 90 days is made up of 12, 13 weeks. And so it's about being ruthless about prioritizing what's the one or two things that we really want to move the dial on in the next 3 months, in the next 90 days, and getting everyone in the team aligned behind that, so that you can really, really implement decisively from all parts of the business. And then having the focus and the accountability around that. So weekly review of progress, tracking and measuring the important metrics and milestones, and then asking that question: if we're not on track, what's getting in the way? What do we need to do to course correct? Who needs to do what? And when are you going to get it done by? And holding each other accountable to do that, and not letting other priorities jump in unless you explicitly agree that we're actually going to do this ahead of this. but doing that in a planned way. That's the only way I know. I mean, there's a great book. I know you're going to ask for a book recommendation, so I may as well give it to you now. But John Doerr's Measure What Matters comes to mind. He talks about executing in some very, very large scale up organizations, but I think the discipline's great for SMEs as well, which is those one or two priorities. So you have an overarching priority, and then you break that down into what that's going to require from each function in the business, and they set their priorities around that as well. And so everybody's working on the same goal, and we're measuring that across the business. So I think that's a really good way of making sure you stay on track, because then individuals can't kind of drop the main thing and start doing something else, because they know they need to come back and be accountable for the priority that's been agreed. Yeah, that would be my way. And then obviously using your diary. I think your calendar is probably the most important strategy tool you've got, more so than the business plan, right? Because actually your calendar is going to tell you everything about where your priorities are.
Yeah, I agree. I think the calendar's really interesting in that sense, because, you know, you talk about the default diary and the importance of putting activity into your diary and sticking to it. And actually, if you do stick to those things, so I said, like, you know, how do you avoid moving from one bucket to the other? And of course, like, you know, when you've got tasks and activities in your default diary, that also lends itself really well to the systems that we're talking about, right? Because the idea is that your systems are in the diary. And if you're following that diary and sticking to that structure, then really you should be staying in the right kind of, you know, your attention should be focused in the areas that that it needs to be focused in, right? It sounds quite simple when you put it like that, but it isn't always as simple to follow. It takes a lot of discipline, and that discipline needs to become habitual, right? Which is the kind of point of it. Yeah. So you need to really follow those. And we you know, the same themes pop up a lot here, but it might be worth just kind of talking about that very briefly now in terms of the habitual side of sticking to these things, because obviously once you're working in those areas, when your attention is in those kind of growth areas, if you like, and you get used to being in those growth areas and spending more time in those growth areas, that becomes a habit by default, doesn't it? And then the business, you know, the needle moves, as we say, as a result of that, you know, and the compound nature of that as well.
You said, I was about to say, it's the compounding nature of those habits, right? If for example you're spending an hour a day on strategic business development, you've got the discipline to kind of hold that golden hour where you do nothing but you think about how you're going to move your strategic prospects or strategic partners forward, and you keep that in focus. You keep doing that day in, day out, week in, week out, over a long period of time. There is no doubt in my mind that moves the dial around you know, your pipeline and your partnerships and so on. But what do most people do? They don't have that level of discipline. They might even spend an hour or two a week, and it'd be ad hoc, and it won't be consistent. But that's not the rhythm that's really going to move the dial. The rhythm that's going to move the dial is that level of focus. So Matt, the thing I was thinking was, it's as important to decide what you are going to put your attention to as it's as important to decide what you're not going to do as it is deciding what you are going to do. Deleting things or deferring things, not that they're not important, but you can't do everything focusing on one thing. What Warren Buffett speaks really well around this, as he says, strategy is about as important to decide what you're not going to do as it is to decide what you are going to do.
Yeah, and that's really interesting as well, isn't it? Because you can talk about that compound nature as well, in that works in reverse as well, doesn't it? Like, you know, the compound nature of bad habits, or of not doing the things, like, you know, can stack up pretty quickly as well. Like, you know, things like your pipeline can dry up, or your stress levels are increasing, and that can compound as well. Evenings become more like, you know, work, you know, you might start working in evenings and that type of thing. So those compound up in a negative way pretty rapidly as well. And often we don't pay attention to the things we should have been paying attention to until we're in that negative zone, and it forces us to pay attention to those things, right? Which is quite interesting.
When you're pushed into it, you know, that's a seesaw of, for example, your pipeline. work really, really hard, get focused on developing that. Then you get busy because you won the project, so you got them over the line, and you stop consistently doing the work on the pipeline. So, and then guess what happens? 3-6 months later, you've got the dip again. And I think building and growing a business beyond a lifestyle business where you want to be the conductor of the orchestra, not playing all the instruments in every section, you've got to focus on that prioritization and orchestration. I think that's the job of the leaders, to provide that direction, to bring everyone constantly back to the main thing and not diluting effort, focus, resource. Yeah, the best businesses I work with, they get good at that in a structured, systematic way, and the directors and the leaders get used to kind of having that discipline and coaching that discipline through their.
Yeah, all agreed. So look, here's a practical reset framework that I was kind of thinking of here. Is think about basically, and this is what I've done this week, with your support, which is what are the 1 or 2, 3 outcomes that were genuinely going to make a difference for me this quarter? What are the things that I need to focus on? How much time did I spend on them in the last week, the last 2 weeks, the last month? And then understanding what would happen if I was to say diarize 45 minutes a day, I think is what we discussed, just focusing on those core outcomes alone. And that is going to make a difference, isn't it? Essentially, it's where you're focusing your attention. If I'm just going to take 45 minutes, an hour a day to focus on this thing, that's 5 hours a week. That's 20 hours a month. That's 60 hours over this quarter to focus on that thing. 60 hours is a hell of a long time to achieve the goals that you're looking for if you're just focusing on that for 1 hour a day, right? It's easy, Sanjeev, surely.
Yeah, exactly, Matt. And it is easy because it's making decisions about the most important outcome that you need to make progress on tomorrow before following your inbox around, before following any other request around and so on. And if you can double that time, even better. So Matt, my one tip I would give is the daily and weekly wrap and review. Right. Which is, once you've got that plan, once you've got those priorities and they're agreed and a team are aligned to it, you should have the discipline every day to say, what did I do to move that forward today? What's gone well? What's not gone so well? What do I need to focus on tomorrow? When am I going to do it? How long is it going to take? When am I going to do it? Do that every day. That brings you back to the priority. Right. And then focus on that thing, eat that frog. Eat that frog for breakfast before you get sucked into everything else. And then the weekly wrap and review, the weekly reflection, taking some time to really think about how you've moved the dial, what's gone on, what's getting in the way, what's the interference, what's the root cause of that, not just the symptoms that you're seeing, and what actions you need to take, which is usually a systems resourcing, time allocation, or training kind of action in terms of a systemic solution. All right, so what are those priorities for the next week, and so on. You do the daily, weekly, that then really takes care of the attention challenge, brings us back. It's like any tracker, right? You want to lose 10 kilos over if you're not measuring it, then you're not going to be accountable. If you're not accountable, then you start drifting.
Absolutely, that can, and again, things I can relate to and things that I know that I've worked on and still need to work on. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. As always, we're going to wrap it up there for today. Thank you also for watching and listening today. If you do have any comments, do find us on our social channels and feel free to comment. And we'll see you next time, Sanjeev. Thanks very much.